Welcome to the Little Blackfish podcast, where we will explore different streams of thoughts in the form of unfiltered dialogues with thought leaders from around the world. I'm Dr.SaraNasserzadeh. I'm a social psychologist and a psychotherapist. Today I'm in dialogue with my good friend and colleague Julia Samuel from England about living losses. Julia is a psychotherapist and has 2 best-selling books that we will be talking about in this episode. She has a wealth of wisdom to share with us in this time of collective trauma, loss, and grief on many different levels. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Sarah.
It's so wonderful to have you here today. If I may say something about your background, you worked more than almost 3 decades now, right?
30 years, yeah.
30 years with families with the most horrific losses parts of your career, dealing with loss of children that is unimaginable for anyone, really. I think, well, besides research, as a mother, I can tell you that it's unimaginable, really. And in your book, Grief Works, you talked about how people can really, as a community, personally as well as community, help each other to cope with grief. And you are encouraging people not to rush through grief and really validate it, acknowledge it, don't think of it as such a taboo. It's a part of life, and we have to really learn and get ourselves skilled around it. And I know that it became a instant best-selling in the UK, which is another affirmation as how much we were craving for such a mentality. And then most recent book that I read from you was This Too Shall Pass, The Stories of Change, Crisis, and Hopeful Beginnings, which just came out in March, right before this thing hit, which was pretty incredible. I'm hoping that we can talk about some of those stories as a part of the narrative that we are shaping. And so I think, and right at the beginning, I want to tell people that if they want to connect with you, they can go to your Instagram page, that I find your posts very enlightening. They're just those pearls of wisdom that you share. Julia Samuel, MBE, on Instagram, and also your bio with your website and podcasts and articles will be shared with this video so that people know as how to connect with you and how to read more about this whole topic. Okay, on that note, let's talk about what's going on.
I mean, you said, can we make sense of it? And I think we could make a lot of connections by discussion. I think through talking to each other, you and me talking, families, it is what everybody is talking about. I don't think we can ever fully explain it, but I think we can begin to make sense of what some of our responses are. So one of the ways I've been thinking about it, and it's in my last book, This Too Shall Pass, is that the minute the kind of virus became clear that it was going to change our life, in lockdown, and that it was, such an enormous pandemic, is that it's a living loss. Mm-hmm. And that is like grief, and it has all the qualities of grief, that you feel angry, you feel scared, you feel confused, you feel numb, you feel lost, you want it to over, you're thrown onto a kind of alien landscape, and you want someone to give you a map and tell you, if you do this, this, and this, you'll get back home, and then we can start all over, and then everything's better. But of course, grief of all sorts. And as you were talking about, the level of your loss is equal to the level of your love. So the emotional investment that you had in the person that died, or in this case, in our lives, our jobs, our way of living, our structure, our purpose, and some people, their livelihoods, their everything, is equivalent to the loss. And so for some people, it will be an enormous living loss, with everybody else having it too. So there's a sort of sense of hierarchy. Am I allowed to be upset? Because I'm not, is it legitimate what I'm feeling? Because, my neighbor 2 doors down, not only did his business crash, but his mother died. Or So the kind of things that I've been thinking about and writing about and talking about is, first of all, that to give ourselves permission and self-compassion for that whatever we're feeling is normal. We may feel like we're going mad, but that is part of grief, is that you feel a bit mad. I was going to say bonkers, but I don't think that's a word you use in America. And there are many things that make a difference. So the first kind of biggest thing is to love and connection to others. So when love dies, it's the love of others that helps you survive. And that includes yourself. So be as kind to yourself as you would a friend. Don't criticize yourself, be self-compassionate, and connect to people so that you can find support. And it may be online that you connect to people. But I think that, you know, when we let the thoughts and the fears go whirling around in our mind, we can really create disaster scenarios. So I don't know if you want me to go straight into it, but there are sort of 3 or 4 habits that people can do on a daily basis that can help them. So the first thing is that grief feels like fear, and this pandemic, certainly people's levels of anxiety have skyrocketed. And the fastest track route to lower anxiety is exercise. So it may be indoors with an online course, it may be a 12-minute app on your phone. If you're lucky, it may be that you can go for a run in the park or a cycle or go outside. It's better if you can go outside because nature, particularly in spring, is restorative. But if you do a combination of exercise, come home and even do a 5-minute breathing exercise. You know, you don't have to find Buddha or this calm lake and, you know, be Zen himself. You just, if you breathe in for 7, for a count of 7, and out for a count of 11, and you do it for 5 minutes after your exercise, and then give yourself an intentional treat. So your treat might be a delicious breakfast. It might be a hug with your partner. It might be that you play a lovely piece of music. Whatever it is, that combination is a very good set of habits that help calm your system. And that's the first thing that you need to do in a pandemic or in grief, is that your system is on overdrive through the shock and the fear and the unknown. And you want, if you live at that level, you make bad decisions, but also you accelerate the panic. So you feel it worse and worse. So if you do physical active behaviors that you can do every day, so this isn't asking for some vaccine, it's not asking for the impossible. This is something that you have control of, that you keep your skylines short, you keep them in the day, you have a kind of adaptable but rough plan schedule for the day, and you have that combination at some point in the day. It would be different for different people. For me, I always do it before breakfast because it kind of sets me up. Other people like doing it in the evening or lunchtime, whatever it is. And the other thing that really helps is intentionally doing things that comfort you. So that is talking to friends if they comfort you. But if you're a real introvert, that just takes a lot of energy. Again, you need to talk to 1 or 2 friends. But it may be reading poetry. It may be looking out the window and looking at the spring. It may be reading a fantastic book. It may be listening to music. It may be creating a playlist for yourself for different moods. And that helps your whole system regulate and be more, as you will know, more emotionally open. And then that changes your day because you have more capacity to think, to kind of make plans, to talk to the people that you work with. And also the thing about being high octane is that you transmit signals of fear or you're bad tempered. And so you become the version of yourself that you can't take in love and affection. So it's a very cruel part of grief, is that you become the person that people don't want to be with. You know, because you're not, when you're in a really good mood and you're happy and you're calm and you're dancing and skipping, people always want to hug you and come towards you. If you're kind of super anxious and you're angry and you're scared, people go, whoa, you know, you can carry on and do that on your own. But what you need is to connect to people. I can see you nodding love beautifully.
Oh, that absolutely, I agree with every single word that you said. And I'm trying to distill the wisdom into the words that people can remember. What I heard, and I completely agree with you, is in this state, many people, if I may just build up on what you mentioned, many people talk about trauma. To be honest with you, I don't know. I find myself talking about individual trauma and collective trauma. But then last night, as you know, as we take it 1 hour at a time, one day at a time, last night something occurred to me. I don't think this is even at the level of feeling as what is happening. We're shocked. So as you mentioned, when a person is shocked, so fear arises from the unknown stimuli, right? So an unknown thing happened. We're all in this kind of primal, instinctive.
We're wired for being. We have that negative bias to look for danger. It's the amygdala. It's telling us the tiger is at you. The
Exactly.
pathogen is at your door. Watch out. So, I mean, it's an evolutionary system that we have to respond to. But in this case, we can't shoot the tiger.
Exactly. So what I'm hearing you say is validation. So one of the works that I really loved, not relevant to grief as much, but the works of Kenneth Hardy and Tracy Lasulfi. They talk about how when devaluation happens, right? So how all of these losses, devaluation, loss of community, all of that we're experiencing, right? Erosion of community happens, how a build-up of rage comes to be, right? And as you talked about it, you said anger and all of that. And Elizabeth Kolber-Ross talks about it, and David Kessler talk about the stages. And now David came up with this sixth stage, that meaning making, right? So in his new book. But I wonder, which is really interesting, you also mentioned that have a routine for yourself, right? Can we for a moment go back to that? Because I feel, okay, so here's what I'm observing from my clients, and I'm pretty sure, especially in your book, you mentioned people, how differently people cope, right? One is, I have a CEO right now, he cannot leave the bed. He literally calls me from his bed. He just gets up, goes to, eat something not to die, and goes to the bathroom, back to bed, and, that's it. And I have another person who is way into the book that she wanted to write for 11 years, and now she's almost done. So how do we count for these different experiences, like personal, like internal motivation to get you out of bed to do that even 15 minutes? I was asking him, can you please just shave for me when you come to our sessions? I like your face to be shaved. Can you do that for me? It takes such an effort for him to even get him there. So what do you think? Like, how can we help those people who are really flat?
So that everybody has a default mode mechanism in response to loss. So, and that really we'll have learned very young. We'll have learned it by what we observed with our parents around us. We'll have learned it from our culture as well.
Absolutely.
But it's the first response. It's like you shut down, you collapse, or you get super busy, you get creative, and you can't control that. So that is in him going to bed, she writing a book. That is their kind of wired response that they've learned from a young age. And what you're doing with the man is supporting him to allow that. Like, I'm not telling you don't be in bed, you're not doing it wrong, but also allow to develop another mechanism that supports more resilience, that will help you engage with your day. So he's saying it's too chaotic, I can't cope with it. I'm not going to deal with any of it, it's too much. And what you're talking about is that when the external world is totally chaotic and your internal world is matched by that chaos, you can give up and you can despair. Or you can allow your despair and feel sadness and scared, but also create little small structure and limits within your day and habits that give you a sense of satisfaction, that give you a sense of agency, that give you some resilience, so that at the end of this day, I can't say I just didn't get out of bed. You can say, I got up and I cooked myself some lunch. I talked to my mum, I replied to a few emails, I did some yoga. By the way, for trauma, dance and yoga are the best exercise because they switch the amygdala off more than other exercise. But anyway, so what you're wanting, what everybody needs to find their own toolbox for, because this isn't a one size fits all, is a set of balancing mechanisms and habits, behaviors and attitudes that helps build their courage to dare to feel, that then builds their courage to have to dare to have some behaviors, to trust, to have hope, and the endurance to weather it. And if they go through this process with that, through those habits, they'll come out the other end. And what people talk about, and I don't know if this is trauma, it will be trauma for people who die on an intensive care unit being observed by their family on a screen, right? If you can hardly have a funeral. So that will be a very traumatic death. What I think what is worth thinking about is at the end of this, whenever this is, and we can't predict it, you want to look back at this unique time. And what will you have said about yourself? What did I learn about myself? Not that you have to learn Russian and the cello. I mean, I think some people who's Instagramming, I'm now using this as an opportunity to be my perfect self. I think that's unrealistic. But given that I'm suffering, given that my business has crashed and burned, given that feel hopeless, how can I best support myself to keep it in the day, to have a day, and then look back and think, well, do you know, it was really painful and I really suffered, but also I supported myself and I've learned things about myself. I don't think we learn until it's retrospective. So while you're suffering, I'm not saying go and think, you know, what the meaning is or what you've learned or it's post-traumatic growth, which people are already talking about. It's too soon.
I completely agree with you. There's a great space now that people say, if you don't learn a new language, if you don't learn something about yourself, if you don't meaning make, or I work with the UN quite a bit with the religious task force. There's a lot coming out of extreme religious communities that this is a punishment for this, for that, for that, for that. So it's as if, everyone is trying to make sense of it. It's as if we are flying the plane and making it two at the same time. Nobody can say that I've got it figured out. Come, I'll give you the answer. I really think that's not a human thing to do these days. You have to be a superhuman to be able to do that. So I like the fact that you remind us to slow down, start with yourself, with what you can do, validate yourself and others, right? So the way that we grieve and the way that we deal with this whole craziness. You're not crazy to do what you do.
It's normal. And a way of adding to that or saying the same thing, maybe in different words, is that, and I use this a lot in this Too Shall Pass, is that our emotional self takes a long time to catch up to the event. So maybe the person has died, but it takes months and even years to emotionally adjust to the person that's died. The same with this. This will take months for people to process, adjust, find meaning, feel growth, understand themselves differently, do different things in life because their purpose has changed because of it. Right now, we just need to keep it in the day and not act out and do harm. I think do no harm would be a very good way of doing it.
Absolutely. I actually encourage one of my clients the brother of a client to go and take all the guns away from his house because he was pretty suicidal and I was not confident that nothing could happen. So I completely agree with you, and checking for that context as how safe we are. And so this is really helpful to remind people. So if we want to kind of extract the pearls so far, right? So if you want to give people snapshots, what would they be?
Be kind to yourself. Keep it in the day. Have a small structure, not a police state. Take exercise and meditate. Journal. Do something that is journal to write down how you feel if you don't want to talk to someone. Do things that intentionally comfort you. So for me, I watch Modern Family. It's funny, it takes 20 minutes. I love all the characters. I see them everywhere. I adore them. Changes my mood. Sometimes I dance in the kitchen to music when I'm doing supper. That shifts my mood. But do things or cook my favorite supper. So intentionally do things that you know you're going to put in a good mood. And I mean, one of the other things, and this isn't about getting a halo or something, but when you feel powerless, maybe doing something for others is a way to feel your agency, and you feel better about yourself and they feel better too. So it could be knocking on a neighbor's door and dropping some food off if they can't get it for themselves, checking in with people. And it's you can do small acts of kindness that help you feel better about yourself. That would be the things. The understanding of it is that everything that you are experiencing is invisible. And what you look like, what's crazy making is that you and I look exactly the same. Your room where you're sitting is the same, my room's the same, and yet the world has changed. And so all of the feelings that we're feeling are below the waterline, and they're enormous. And they're kind of pushing through our system and wanting to come out, and we're wanting to have control. So the other big thing is the serenity prayer. Accept the things you cannot change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think as the 21st century...
Because not many people are familiar with that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So no, it's the serenity prayer. It's AA, it's from Al-Anon, which is to accept the things you cannot change the things you can, and have the wisdom to know the difference. And I think particularly successful people or people who've always been super busy, they think they can Marie Kondo their feelings into order. And then if they set their mind to it, that's worked for them in every other way of their life, through their exams, through their business, through their ambition, that they think if they think hard enough, they're going to get through this and work it out. And I think the 21st century gives us a full sense of our control because of healthcare is so amazing. It does save lives. Technology is incredible and super smart. And we're not used to being like the Victorians, where you kind of accepted that there was almost everything you had no control over. So I think we've had this full sense of our control. And I think we have to accept that the things that actually matter to us most, which is the birth, death, and how people love us or don't love us, we can influence them, but we actually fundamentally have no control. And that can be liberating because, take the thinking out, breathe, calm down, accept what you can't change, work with what you have.
Exactly. Thank you for that. You remind me of Stephen Covey's 2 circles. Remember those ones? The one in the middle, circle of influence, and the one around it, circle of concern. So that serenity prayer is really the gist of that. Julia, can you please also talk to something that comes up from many different groups, from colleagues, from clients, so I'm grieving, you're grieving, if we can call it a proper grieving, whatever that proper grieving is. So we're in it together.
Living loss, I think it's a living loss, but...
Exactly. I am going to adopt that word. So living losses, right? That we are in that pandemic of it. So I wonder, how can we be for each other, be there for each other? For example, that neighbor again. So there's a range. Some people are motivated by thinking about others, right? Some people are not. Some people are. So I wonder, because there are different levels of losses here again. People lost their whole belief that if there's a God, he would have saved my mother, Or for example, I know that in North Africa and the Middle East, I'm in touch with colleagues, and they report of people who go to these shrines and they feel like, well, if I stay here, if I isolate myself here, which you cannot isolate yourself there, right? So if I'm here with other brothers and sisters, I'm not going to contract the disease. And when they do, or when one of the religious leaders get it and die, they feel like, oh my God, so they weren't as invincible that I thought. So the whole that existential belief system is completely gone. And then coming to the coupledom and the household, For couples, their partners as they know them are gone. What is this erratic behavior? Or what are you doing? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you selfish? Do you even care about me? Care about you? Care about our marriage, relationship?
It's your turn to empty the dishwasher. You know, the wrangling about domestic life, that space going to work, coming back, you know, or the fight over bandwidth or rooms or
Yes.
school, homeschooling, all of those things become intensified. Everything becomes bigger.
So what are the top losses that you observe in families and especially coupledom?
Well, I think what you're talking about is that our belief system is informed by our experience.
Mm-hmm.
So if our experience up to now is being that I go to whatever my organized religious place is, whether it's a synagogue or a mosque or a church, and I pray, I'm good things will happen to me, and they'll good things, it makes sense, good things will happen in my community. And in the same way, I think people believe if I've been super clever, I got a very good degree, I've worked very hard, I'm a nice person, I'm a good husband, I'm a good wife. So those things should happen to me. So people have this sense of, why is a bad thing happening to a good person? Because up to then, their belief system is always delivered. So their trust in themselves, their trust in life is completely shaken. And what it requires of them is to really examine, what their magical thinking is, to kind of recognize what actually they've believed, which is accurate and what isn't. Because bad things happen to good people all the time, out of the blue, for no reason. If you have faith, you may be able to give it an understanding, but from my view, is watching families where children die for 25 years, you can never make sense of something, of the death of a child. And I think in relationships and families, I think, first of all, lockdown is not the same for all. No. So those who are economically deprived and have more difficulties, or already more vulnerable, it is much, much worse. And I think we really need to acknowledge that. And they will need they need support now that they're probably not getting. They'll need a lot of support post-lockdown. But also, like in my family with my husband, any pre-existing fault lines, which have been more or less covered over because we're both busy, we're out all day, we're doing interesting things, we come back, we eat, we go to bed, and then we have a nice weekend. But the structure of that meant that we were sort of protected from the minutiae, from the crap, from the domestic stuff, from fighting over things. There was enough of everything. Now there isn't enough of everything. And we're stuck inside. One of the best things that we always do is go for a walk together, and we walk and talk. And we can do that actually, but you can't do as much.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And, some of the other things that I hear from my couples along the lines that you describe is lack of a space. Yes. Physical space, because as you mentioned, there are privileges in this world. Some people live in big houses, some people live in teeny tiny apartments with their children, and everybody has their own preferences, and they're policing each other around, they're watching each other. Affairs are being found out these days, and they are mourning the loss of that connection that they had, and now they can't really keep that secret relationship. So it's a very interesting range that we are observing.
It's exposing our fault lines.
Yes, the fault lines are all highlighted. Absolutely. And the other thing is, people who are privileged in whatever way, socioeconomically, it could be different abilities, it could be different, like in the United States, unfortunately, we know at least from one state, we are sure of that in Chicago, we are losing a lot of people from African American families versus other families. And then they went on, yesterday a report came out, these are the things that are pretty controversial. And it's not talked about, but within those communities, these are not just numbers that we're talking about. These are people
and their stories.
Yeah, as you know, Maulana Rumi puts it as, you are not one drop in the ocean. For me, you are the whole ocean in one drop. And I feel like the other day, Angela Merkel was talking, and
you posted that on Instagram. I read it. It was wonderful.
Oh, I did. Yes. Thank you. it's really interesting. Angela Merkel the other day was talking to I believe it was a journalist. I was just watching it in the passing, and they said, well, such and such number of people died, da, 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 da. And then she said, hang on a minute, you just said this number of people died. How can you just move on?
That's good.
Just take a
Very
moment.
human. Yeah, take a moment.
We're human, so humanizing the loss, right? So these are the ones that I think taking the shame away from it. The other thing that you remind me of with this whole thread that you mentioned was one thing that we use in cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So we say if you receive the information as it is, just receive it as an information. So this happened. For example, I cannot get out of the bed. That's a piece of information for me, right? Then you don't let it evoke that much of an strong feeling.
It's like being mindful.
Exactly. Being mindful and acknowledging, as you mentioned earlier, acknowledging the emotion that comes. That makes me helpless, sad. I feel angry. Just stay with it for a second, right? And then prepare a response to it, which might be, okay, I choose to validate it and stay in bed for another hour or the whole day. Or react to it, which is panic. So there's a minute difference, right, between receiving the information. If we go for it immediately without that level, we are reacting. But if not, we are being responsive. And what I hear is you're inviting people to be a little bit more responsive when you use the words like agency, sense of agency. What is it that you can control? Do you tell us a little bit about these stories that you collected in your book? Any cross-cultural differences? Any let's just start there.
So yeah, I mean, there's a woman. So I divide the book into family, love, work, health, and identity. And so they're all case studies of people I'd worked with, and they're stories of change. So they're about divorce or losing your job or your child getting married or having a baby. So all the different living losses through life. And one of them was in the family one. She was called One Day, and her parents had come here from Nigeria and worked very hard, were amazing parents, quite simple in the sense of not very sophisticated, but powerful and clever, and produced this amazing woman who was very successful, far more successful than them. So she felt sometimes she lived in two countries. Like when she went to them, she was in their country, eating their food, speaking their language. And then when she went to her home with her husband and her child, they had a different country. But also she had an enormous sense of guilt because she was successful as a comedian and she wasn't at home. So she wasn't parenting in the same way as she had been parented. But also she had trauma in her system because her father had had a terrible car crash. And so that had been very traumatic, and the birth of her son had been very traumatic. So the sort of, what we needed to do was unlock and find the narrative for those different aspects of herself, which she knew, but she had got them in a tight little poison inside her system that she was doing it wrong, that she was wrong. There was something wrong about how she was. And actually she felt suicidal, although on the face of it, she had a lovely husband, she had a lovely child, she had so that made her feel a bit crazy too. And one of the sort of aspects of the book that I wanted to get people to understand was that when you find words to describe what you're feeling, that you kind of have the space to go inside, it's a bit like what you're talking about. You access what you're feeling, you find words to describe it. You say the words that you've hidden and gone round and round in your head. They're received, they're heard. You make sense of them, you allow them. Then the actual emotion comes through and that releases you. So that's a simple way of saying it. And then she understood the story of herself. She understood why she felt how she did. And that gave her permission to be who she was, that she wasn't this bad daughter or bad mother. And then she used lots of coping mechanisms and she understood other things about herself. So she kind of grew from it in a way that allowed her to be who she really was, which was owning her Nigerian roots, owning her middle class newfound success in life, and taking pleasure in it, and feeling more connected with herself, more connected within her kind of modern as a mother, and connected with her roots. And so, but it was a painful process, and it always takes longer than people want. Things that you do to avoid the pain of loss are in the end the things that do you harm.
Can you say that again?
The things that you do to avoid the pain of loss, whether it's a living loss or death, are in the end the things that do you harm. And that pain is the agent of change. Pain is there to tell you it's wired. We're wired to adapt, evolutionary. We know it from Darwin, that the discomfort at one end, pain at the other, is your body telling you it's knocking at the door. Something new has happened. You have to adjust. Wake up, look at this, pay attention, allow the feeling, allow it out, express it. And as you do, you expand and shift and change. And those that don't adapt and change, it's clear in the research, have less joy and less success in life, and they find change harder next time. So that we need to find who we are in our own little toolbox, and I hope they find it in my book, of what supports you through change, because change is coming. I mean, it happens every 7 to 10 years. So that 7-year itch is a real thing. And now it's happened globally, obviously, in a different way that is, I guess, every 100 years.
Exactly. Thank you. So the words that I take away is, again, permission, connection at various levels. And, you know, one of the things
and resistance, the things that you block, that pain is the agent of change. I think that's important.
Yes. So some problems, we go around them. This is the one that we have to go through it. Absolutely. You know, sometimes I tell my clients that your relationship as you know it is over. And we spend the whole like a long day or a few sessions just to grieve over that and start it all over again. Right. So, and I found that interesting. And I really would love to emphasize this word that you're using, living losses, because that's a validation on its own.
Yeah.
That takes the negative connotation out of it, that I might lose, you know, as little as my client was saying that, please don't judge me, but I miss my morning coffee at the local coffee shop. I'm like, who am I to judge?
And don't we all? That lovely habit.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. So I think that is really, really important. And I'm just looking at my notes because while I have you, I really don't want to let you go before I ask all the questions that I received. And I think we covered pretty much a great deal of these. And what reassures me is that there are 2 amazing books of yours out there that people really can get their hands on and start reading. And you know, that G word, the grief. And so I think this living losses, I love that. If we
and
can
also to remember that, you know, when people look back on their lives, the thing that matters to them most is their love and connection to others.
Yes.
So that while that love and connection is tested now, tested in a way it may not have been before, although people have had, you know, terrible traumatic experiences, try and kind of put a ceasefire on the irritation. Try and be a bit more tolerant. Try and take a breath. You know, like when you want to shout at your husband for finishing the milk, kind of take a breath, walk away, like be respectful and careful with our relationships now, because I think this lockdown is going to happen for a long time, right?
That's
and
very
tear holes in this relationship. You know, we're paying a higher price. We're paying a very high price. You know, I saw in China, divorce rates have already gone up a great deal. In New York already, 3 weeks down the line, divorce rates have gone up.
Yes.
So, and I don't know other places, it probably has.
Domestic violence, unwanted pregnancies, STIs, we're just receiving the statistics from the UN studies. So it's a very,
So, I mean, these words are banded around everywhere now. And so I don't want to kind of make them lose their real meaning. I guess if you're self-compassionate first, you're kinder to others. So I'd start, you know, like I said at the beginning, be kind to yourself and take a breath, slow down, I think that really helps. And don't expect your system to adjust fast.
Yeah, that permission, again, going back to the permission and validation and reducing the shame.
So my daughter taught me a lovely ritual that she's doing with her children. So she, all of us have been driven nuts in different ways. She was getting on with her job, and now she had to stay home and homeschool and all the things, lots of us have become 1950s housewives in a way that we never really would have chosen, right? All of my kids, actually. Anyway, so she ranted and raged, and we all ranted and raged for a few days. And then she, which we need to do, I mean, that's fine, she thought of so they decided to have a Cobra meeting every few days as a family. Check in with each other. What are you finding difficult? What do you want? What would make this day a good day? And a sort of stress test out of 10, how upset are you? Angry are you? Frustrated are you? So that you bring up above the waterline what's going on underneath, have a kind of rough plan for the day. And you do that every few days. Every day it might be a bit intense. But then every day in the evening, they have a lovely ritual, which is one person in the family chooses a piece of music. So they listen to the piece of music, and then they do a 5-minute meditation. So again, that's not like going to it's just breathe in, breathe out, 5 minutes. And then they each say a gratitude. And it marks the end of the day. They then get on, have supper, watch a bit of telly or whatever. And I think those sorts of connecting small behaviors help manage the impulsive behaviors.
Exactly. Recreating rituals in a way for a family. Yeah, absolutely.
New rituals.
New rituals, right. Julia, I can't let you go because we can have this conversation for eternity. And I'm so grateful. You're such a gem and such a blessing, really.
But you too. I mean, you've got so much to say. It's fantastic. You've got so much wisdom. It's a lovely thing to have the opportunity to learn from you and see your beautiful face and learn what you're thinking. And
oh my God, you are so sweet and kind, and act of kindness. I give it back to you.
And to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julia.
Pleasure.
And I'm sure that in the midst of all of this, you will get even busier than ever because your wisdom is needed even more than before. And I'm, again, very grateful that you chose to spend this hour with me. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining me, Dr. SaraNasserzadeh, on the Little Blackfish podcast today. To learn more about Julia Samuel and access all the resources and material discussed in our dialogue, please go to my website at sara-nasserzadeh.com, and also connect on social media and let me know what you would like to hear in the upcoming episodes and podcasts. Join us next week when we talk about resiliency redefined.